soft spot for 80s fantasy, and that's for a number of reasons. One, I often really like the characters, stories, and journeys, but I also really like the practical effects. I love the world, I like the atmosphere. And something about 80s fantasy specifically has a very unique mix of whimsy and darkness that I find particularly compelling. Maybe it's the synth, which I also really like. One I had never actually seen before is Neverending Story, so I checked it out 2 days ago, and I really, really liked it. There will be spoilers in this video in case you'd never seen it and want to check it out. My introduction to Neverending Story was actually from BuzzFeed. It was on a list of fictional character crushes. A lot of girls, probably boys too, liked Atreyu, and that's how I was introduced to Neverending Story, because kids in the 80s had a crush on Atreyu. And he's a good character. He's a cute kid, good actor, so I can see why. But the story itself is legitimately fun and interesting, and it came at a very unique time in pop culture. This was the time where people were afraid that kids were not going to read anymore, that people were abandoning books for TV, that TV was a lesser medium. It's very, very similar to how people are criticizing smartphones and how that's the death of imagination. People were saying that about TV, so clearly this stuff is always going to be around. And I could feel that coming through here, because the source of imagination is a book, and what's taking over the land of Fantasia, or what's killing this land of human imagination, is a representation of apathy called the Nothing. So there's this underlying message about the importance of imagination, and very subtly about the importance of reading. I didn't feel that the message was too heavy-handed, but I certainly could feel its place in pop culture. That was a worry at the time. But I always like stuff that's pro-imagination, about the importance of imagination. This didn't feel too heavy-handed. It felt like it was still a legitimately good story. But I have seen other TV specials, and I have heard a lot of people talk about this in a very heavy-handed way, so it can very easily become propaganda, but it really doesn't here. I know Stranger Things referenced the catchy opening song. A couple of things about this film. I noticed it's actually a lot shorter than I expected. Usually in these kinds of Alice in Wonderland style journeys, a character spends a little bit of time in different parts of the journey, different areas in the land, and you don't get that too much here. Atreyu definitely goes through his journey, but it doesn't focus as much on the unique worlds and characters he comes across. I would have liked to see more. You get a couple moments of that. But I would have liked to see more. Would have liked to see that go on a little longer, feel like you're part of that world. There is a lot of open space in the background. You definitely feel the Nothing taking over, but you also still feel the creativity of all these designs. There was, forgive me if I don't get all the names right, but there was a rock turtle, which reminded me of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the lion turtle, because I remembered, because he comes across this rock turtle. Because I remembered Avatar: The Last Airbender's lion turtle, I kept thinking, oh my god, that's where they must have gotten it from. So that was fun. I appreciated the rock biter, liked that character. For some reason, he made that limestone look so tasty. Did anyone else think that? I don't know. But the film also strangely it does break the fourth wall in a very unique way, in a way that is not very heavy-handed. It's because Bastian's obviously reading the story of Atreyu and his journey to cure the childlike empress, who I actually thought was a bigger part in the movie. I thought she had more screen time, but she's really built up. So they say something like, oh, you know, while an Earth child is reading our story, Others are seeing his story. Others are reading his story. And you take a minute to realize, oh, that's us, the audience. It doesn't feel heavy-handed. It feels you have to get there and think about that for a second. So the cycle of imagination continues. And there's a famous scene where Atreyu's horse, Artax, dies in the Swamp of Sadness, which is kind of I know it's a sad scene, and the acting is really, really well done, and it's genuinely sad, but I kind of found it funny because, one, the horse got depressed, and I kept thinking of BoJack Horseman. I kept thinking, oh man, BoJack should have connected with Artax a bit more. I wonder why BoJack Horseman never referenced that again. The original depressed horse. So, darkly funny. Also, the weird thing about that scene is it's very early in the movie, and usually a big tear-jerking scene like that happens later, in the middle, or maybe even the climax of the film, but here it happens very, very early on in the journey, which surprised me. So it establishes how alone Atreyu is, and how the nothing really is taking over, and it is jarring from a storytelling perspective and also from an emotional perspective. Just, dang, it happened so early on in his journey. So he really has to find the strength to continue going and really persevere through all that, because he's doing most of this journey by himself. And yeah, just interesting. A lot of people talk about how Bastian has to give the childlike empress a name, and he picks his mother's name, which is Moonchild. I was questioning that too. She must have been a hippie or something, or maybe she chose that name for herself. I mean, great name for the childlike empress, but also, that was his mom's name. They say this a couple times, by the way. So, as a kid, I probably would have just gone with it. As an adult, I'm thinking, was that her real name? Was that a stage name? Was she a hippie? Was she a celebrity's kid? I don't know. Oh well, imagination, just go with it. It didn't prevent me from enjoying it, but it did make me question the logic a little bit, because you don't know too much about his mom, but by the way he talks about it, you don't need to know everything. But the little bit you get about her, you do get that she was an interesting person, just even based on her very unique name. So she's the person who is probably passed down the importance of imagination to him. Dead mother trope, by the way. A lot of fantasy and fairy tales, a lot of dead parents, and this one is no exception. Usually the mother. Again, no exception here. I think that's changing nowadays. Yeah, because Disney films, modern Disney films, the parents are around, so glad some traditions are breaking. And yeah, not too much more to say about it. It is a legitimately fun film. It's very creative. Oh, one more thing. Something that does uniquely appeal to me, because he does, Falkor, the dragon he rides, is part of Atreyu's journey, and then Bastian gets to ride on Falkor. And one thing he does is he gets revenge on some bullies, which fills my vengeful little heart with glee. And he just does the same thing to them that they did to him. They essentially throw him in a dumpster. And he does the same thing to them at the end of the movie, because vengeance. I approve. The punishment fits the crime. He just does the same thing to them, so it's not too terrible. And it is kind of satisfying. But more importantly, he has his own journey outside of that. It's not all about the vengeance. He has his own emotional journey outside of that. He does use his imagination. He does pass on his mother's name to the childlike empress. And overall gets to have a really fun blue screen journey through all these distant lands. Even that, because the blue screen is pretty obvious, but I have a soft spot for that too. As long as the emotions are there, I can forgive a lot. And I appreciated the early computer effects. I really loved all the practical effects because you had such really, really creative designs in there. I liked the locations. I liked this world. I liked the designs of the animatronics. And even though not everything is polished, the mouth movements don't always sync up, but you still feel the presence. These characters still feel alive, and the journey is still fun and real. Even if you can see some of the illusion, the journey still feels real, and you still appreciate the character succeeding, and you can still see how much work and effort and dedication was put into this. So there's a reason it stuck around as long as it did. Clearly, the Neverending Story is a story that's going to be continuously told. And it's going to be appreciated, as it should be.